Hello and thanks for joining me for episode 8 of Beating BDD, a podcast about body dysmorphic disorder from the BDD Foundation in the UK. I'm Claire Atherton, and for this episode I spoke to Omari Eccleston-Brown. Omari had so much great stuff to share that we've actually split his interview into 2 parts. Here's what he had to say about what recovery means to him and how BDD affected his life, including his romantic relationships. Hi Omari, thanks so much for coming in. It's really nice to meet you face to face.
Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. Something that's been becoming clear from the people I've spoken to so far is that recovery has very different meanings for different people. What would you say that it means to you?
Well, I think now my working definition for myself of what recovery is not so much recovery in terms of I look in the mirror and I see myself as other people see me or see myself in a way that I like, but more in terms of, am I still doing the behaviours? Because, body dysmorphia is a behaviour-based condition. So things like avoiding mirrors, things like camouflaging, things like avoiding social situations, relationships, all those sorts of things. And recovery for me really looks like limiting those things, but also actually increasingly now to what extent I feel a sense of peace, quite simply. And I think that's also really, peace with what I see in the mirror, peace with any of it. As I move towards that feels more like recovery. Yeah.
When you talk about limiting behaviours, do you have an idea of what's a good number of certain activities in a day, what your kind of threshold is, or are you
Not
less
so much. So I wouldn't work on numbers, but more in terms of the feeling that's behind them. So for instance, when I'm looking in the mirror, rather than kind of counting how many times I do, or probably for me it'd be more don't look in the mirror, it's more if I don't look in the mirror, is it because I genuinely don't need to or don't want to, or am I doing it because I'm feeling anxious and I'm worried about what I'm going to see? So it's more about trying to kind of limit those times when the behavior is motivated by a BDD fear. And likewise, my issues, my eyes, and always has been. And so I used to wear glasses a lot. And then I went to a period of kind of only wearing contact lenses, especially because I sat on my glasses. But now I have glasses again. And there was this interesting point of like, oh, is this behavior going to come back in? And the temptation is there to, wear my glasses on a day when I'm feeling kind of uncomfortable or feeling sort of more vulnerable. And it's about the days that I do wear my glasses where the motivation is, well, actually, it's not good to wear your contact lenses all the time. I know this. And so I want to have a rest day. Or, I just feel like wearing my glasses today. Rather than it being, oh, I must wear my glasses because if I don't, then people are going to judge me or people are going to think I'm ugly, which would be the BDD behaviour. Sure. So it sounds like you've become very good at kind of monitoring your own thoughts and feelings then through this process. Yeah, and I think that's the first step. I think also in terms of recovery, and in terms of everything, right, or any type of recovery, they always say that the first step is awareness. And so it is building up that awareness and realising how I do the things or why I'm doing the things I do. Then the next step on recovery is actually the action, right? And then being able to go, okay, I can see this, and then be able to do it. Now, one of the things I would say about recovery is that the time that takes to go from that awareness to actually taking the action might actually be really long, and you've got to be okay with that. Because it's one thing to sort of know it and one thing to be able to go against all the things that are telling you, all the impulses, and again, remembering that BDD is an obsessive compulsive condition. So actually being able to go, right, I notice it's there, that's what's motivating it. That still might not mean that you can resist doing it. It's a bit like, going on a simple diet and going, I know I need a diet, but I can't resist the brownie right now. And the diet analogy is an interesting one, actually, because a lot of the time people then beat themselves up very badly for not being able to immediately jump on the diet on the 1st of January or whatever it is. So what would you say to people who may be sort of beating themselves up about the time it's taking them to move from stage 1 to stage 2? Well, the first thing I say is I get that completely, and I'm there often, even now. And I think the first thing is, so my friend shared something with me really important, which made a big difference to me because I am very much of that type or that is very quick to beat myself up and go into that whole cycle of blaming myself. I should be doing better and so on. And he said to me that awareness without compassion is like sunlight without any warmth. And that really, really resonated with me and really also helped me to realize that, there's this awareness, but there's also got to be this compassion that, hey, I'm doing the best I can with what I have. I'm doing the best that I can in this moment. And to be compassionate about where you're at, because that's, and that's why I kind of also said that bit about peace, because that's also being at peace with where you are in that moment, because you are only ever where you are.
Yeah, fair enough. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's a really hard process. So that's good advice. So do you want to go back and tell us about your BDD story in general? So when BDD first emerged in your life and how it appeared and how it kind of affected you?
Yeah. So BDD first came about for me when I was 15 going on 16. And I was about to say it was a funny one. I don't know how funny I felt it was at the time, but let's stick with it. It was a funny one. So I had interest in actually being a model. I'd been out on a date took the girl to Trocadero.
Oh, woo.
Yeah, right. Whining and dining. And anyway, so at some point when we were walking, around Piccadilly Circus or something, this guy had given her a card for some modeling agency. And me, because the thing for me was I actually, quite a vain, maybe even arrogant, dare I say it, teenager. So I kind of demanded this card from him and said, hey, I'm the one that needs one. And then anyway, I called them up and they said I needed a portfolio. And I mentioned this to my dad and he surprised me with a photo shoot for my 16th birthday. At some point, after he told me it was going to happen, I don't know where and I don't know why, but I just suddenly got really anxious about my eyes. And for me, it was, at that moment, it was this idea that I had really unsightly bags under my eyes and I looked really tired. And so immediately, these thoughts of, right, I need to control this. And I've got this deadline, which at that point felt like it was sort of looming. And I need to try and control how much sleep I get. I need to try and improve this. And so, all the following mornings from that call with my dad were waking up and checking, going into the mirror and feeling kind of awful because it was never better, probably even worse, and feeling a real sense of helplessness because it was like the one thing that should work isn't working and I don't know what to do and I can't show up on that morning. Let's say it was a Saturday morning looking like this. So the anxiety, and I can see now, because of course at the time I had no idea what BDD was, had no idea what was going on with me. I didn't even really connect it very clearly to the fact that it was the photo shoot, as in, oh, there's clearly a stress point or a trigger or anything like that. It was just, I knew that I was stressed about the photo shoot, but I hadn't connected it in any sort of psychological level. And obviously at that point, not knowing what BDD was, there wasn't a psychological element to it. It was just, I physically look ugly and I don't know what's going on. And then the morning of the photo shoot arrived and I remember locking myself in my family home bathroom, the bathroom of my family home, and immediately feeling this sense of shame. And I don't know if, the other listeners will be able to identify with this, but this real sense of kind of secrecy and hiding away and shame. And somehow that, what I was doing in there was dirty. And so I locked myself in this bathroom and I'm looking in the bathroom mirror, just feeling just all this angst and anxiety. And, I remember pulling at the skin under my eyes, hoping, trying to, but this sense of trying to fix it, but also this sense of like self-loathing, beating myself up. And meanwhile, I remember looking at my watch, seeing the time ticking by and my dad's going to come and pick me up soon. And then in sort of my desperation, I opened the cupboard door and I see my mum's makeup bag there. And I remember still now it's this clear plastic pink bag and I see her liquid foundation in it. And, and I've seen my mum apply makeup and I've seen other women apply makeup. But I remember very distinctly having this thought like, you can't do this. Surely you're not going to do this. And yet, yes, I have to do this. And I'm worried about, my very traditional dad seeing me in makeup and being able to tell, and the photographer, and worried about being exposed on that level for, being this boy who's wearing makeup. But even still, the compulsion was too strong. And it did feel like that, like being compelled to do it. So I put this makeup on and I go to the photo shoot. And the whole time I'm so stressed that some comment's going to be made or that, I'm going to look at the pictures on the camera and that, I'm going to be disgusting. And of course, none of that happens. But, again, my mind isn't going to that place of, oh, let's check this out. Let's see what's the evidence for this. Only later on, when I did CBT, did those sorts of thoughts or were even available to me. But yeah, at the time, I was just so stressed. And then, say a week later, when we had to go back for the photographs, I spent a whole week stressing about this moment where I was going to have to look at the photographs. And I'd built it up so much that by the time I arrived, it was a fact that the photographer was going to Photoshop the eyes and was going to see a problem with them. And sure enough, I got there and he did some touching up around the eyes, as he did now in hindsight with lots of other things, including the background, which didn't even have me in it. But obviously that didn't matter to me at the time. And that was, I always say that was the first brick in the wall of evidence outside of myself, which I think with BDD, you seek the evidence, you gather it. And that person said that one thing once on the 3rd of June at, 7:37 p.m. And that's, another brick in the wall. And that's what it was. And then my story is a bit strange, I think, in as much as from there, the BDD then actually went away once I sort of buried the photos and said, like, I'm never looking at them again.
That's so interesting it did that.
Yeah.
It's unusual.
It is very unusual, right? Because, and I've spoken to lots of people who deal with BDD, and typically it kind of comes and it's there to stay until maybe it goes away completely. But for me, it did sort of go away, and I went back to my normal life until a year later when I went for interviews at university, and I knew there were going to be a bunch of girls there having gone to a boys' school. So I was like, right, this is my moment. No competition. I remember very specifically going, no Josh Lee, because Josh Lee was the guy that all the girls like. He was the hunk that was like, just who we were. Well, I don't know, all. Definitely I was resentful of. So I was like, great, no competition. Yeah, I'm going to be, I'm going to be desirable. And I, again, in hindsight, I'm able to make the connection, 2 occasions where it suddenly became important to be attractive. And it came up again very strongly. But again, very intensely and very briefly for the 3 days I was there, and then went back to my normal life. And I literally have no memory of any BDD thoughts after that for the following year until I now go to university. And again, it's, you're in university, it's Freshers Week. It's all about, pulling, sex, dating, being, partying, everything that I was about to say everything that uni is. I suppose it's meant to be some work, but, but as an 18-year-old, that's really what you're there for. So, yeah, and that's when it came back with a real vengeance. And from there, it hasn't gone away. And that's what, I'm 32 now, so 14 years.
And what do you think maintained it then? So once you got to university, how did it sort of stay around after that period and not disappear again as it had before?
That's a good question. I've never been asked that question before. Honest answer is I don't fully know. One thing that was different about being 18 was that summer between school and actually going to university, I developed a dry eye condition, which I'd never had before. And so I was waking up every morning, in fact still do, with these really dry eyes. And I think there was this really strong connection between there's something wrong with my eyes physically, not in terms of the way they look, but the way that they're functioning, and feeling like that was having a knock-on effect. And I think the other thing that happened was in terms of safety behaviours. So it was only at university that I started to wear glasses as a camouflage. I remember I arrived at university and like recently I had also sat on my glasses back then. So I didn't have any glasses and was feeling very stressed. And I remember there was this girl that I liked, and I knew that she liked me as well, but I was too nervous to act on it because I felt so vulnerable. And that was also very intense to me. And I went to get some glasses, and the first day I had them, this girl said, "Oh, I like you in your glasses," or something like that. And I made that mean, "Oh, thank God you put those glasses on. Don't take those off." And the glasses became a real crutch, and it got to the point where I never wanted to take them off. And I've been in all sorts of ridiculous situations, like it's winter now, there'd be kind of winters where I'd go in from the cold into a warm pub or something, and my glasses would completely steam up immediately. And even then I would refuse to take them off. And I would stand there sort of for those first few awkward seconds saying hey to people and hello with these steamed up glasses. Who knows what they must have thought. And then I would take myself to the cubicle and clean them, and only then would I sort of emerge. But I would make sure I never took them off in front of people because I was so nervous about what people would think if they actually saw my eyes. Even the glasses were never made me feel really comfortable because obviously they're still just clear glass, right? But it was something. And I felt like, the naked truth was too horrific.
What did that do to relationships that you were having in that period? So not just romantic relationships, but friendships, generally your relationships in life. How were they affected?
So that is a quite contradictory one. On the friendships, I'll talk about that first. Because I think one of the other reasons why going to university was such a turning point was that I really decided that I was going to be super popular. And I decided that, I'd left school, the program In-Betweeners, and I'd felt like an in-between. And I was like, but I felt like I was an in-betweener, but that, I was really not an in-betweener. I was like the good guy, and people deserve to know it. So I kind of really, again, in this sort of naive, finding yourself type 18-year-old way was like, right, I'm going to be really popular. And I kind of made that happen. So on the surface of it, I had loads of friends and, and I was in the cool group and all that type of thing. But I didn't tell anybody. So there was only a certain level that my friendships could get to. And I often felt very isolated and alone, even though I had so many people around me. I felt like I didn't belong or fit in. So that's why I say it was a kind of contradictory one. So on the surface of it, I wasn't a loner, but I did feel very alone a lot of the time. And I certainly didn't have any way, I felt at the time, to talk to people about it. So none of my friends knew. Now, relationships, there weren't any. I didn't have my first relationship until I was 20. So I did Spanish and I had a year abroad. And the year abroad, I think getting away and, doing something that was so outside of myself, my normal context, and speaking Spanish, which was part of my degree. And so that was a really good year for me. And then I got in a relationship then. And but previous to that, even though I was always aware of liking girls and there were girls who liked me, I just was too scared to actually kind of really go for it. It just I felt so exposed.
And what about in that relationship that you had during your year off? Do you feel that you behaved differently in that relationship from how you might behave now, for example? Did you have much higher anxiety?
So. I mean, I hope so for like my current girlfriend. I really hope so. Yeah, no, I was miserable. I just didn't know how to deal with it. And I really believe now that relationships are the biggest mirror that we have. And they show up all our nasty little bits and all our insecurities and all our shadows. And it definitely did. So, my girlfriend at the time was this like wonderful, light-spirited, happy-go-lucky, could wax lyrical about a single tomato for hours type girl. And I couldn't cope with how happy she was because it was a reflection of all the sadness that was in me. And that made me very bitter towards her and resentful of her happiness, basically, because it seemed like something that I couldn't have and that she had something. And being in a relationship with somebody like that just felt too intense. And again, I wasn't at a stage where I was telling anybody about it. I'd maybe by this stage told my mum, my dad, my stepdad, and I think maybe 2 friends. I think that was about it. And so I didn't tell her for the whole of the relationship. So of course she didn't also have any understanding of why I was behaving this way. And, I was also felt very insecure. Aside from the reflecting part, there was just this, I think being in a relationship in BDD, and I know that I'm not just speaking for myself because I have spoken to other people about this, it's again, this double-edged sword, or there's kind of 2 sides to it. One, it's great because finally you feel like you've got this reassurance that, hey, I must actually look okay. Somebody finds me attractive. And then at the same time, there's this person that could whip that from underneath your feet at any moment and be like, so I used to have this fear that, suddenly she would wake up one morning and kind of rub her eyes and go, what have I been doing? Like, you're horrible. And that felt like giving a lot of power. And I think in any relationship, regardless of what you're dealing with, there's that vulnerability because that person has the ability to hurt you because you're opening yourself up to them. And I felt that really intensely. And again, didn't have the emotional maturity to recognize that, call it for what it was and deal with it. So not great. And I definitely hope that it's better these days. And I have, I think with each progressive relationship since then, particularly with regard to BDD, of course, there's many other aspects of my life and other aspects to do with my relationships. But with the BDD in particular, I feel like I've learned something new in how BDD shows up in my relationships, what it challenges me with, but also making sure that my partner is included in that. So for instance, after that first one, I was like, right, never again am I not telling them. But then you say my relationship after that, like I told her and then never mentioned it again. So it wasn't exactly that much better. And
it was a step.
And then after that, I was like, yeah, that didn't work either. And then the relationship after that, like it was something that we talked about quite regularly. But then I think went too far the other end. And so it became a lot about, I'm dealing with BDD, and she had her other things, right? And so what was great about it was a very supportive relationship in which, you know, we both were able to talk about the things that we struggled with. But I think we talked about it too much. And I think one thing that's very important with, again, I talk about BDD because that's my personal experience, but really I think any mental health is to not make it your identity. And I think it's very easy to make your troubles into who you are. And I think that's kind of what we did. And it didn't leave much space for anything else. So I was like, right, okay, that's also not that healthy to just completely dive into it. And so again, it's always a learning process.
So in those years when you were pretty much living this sort of secret life, I guess, to a large degree, where nobody outside had any idea what was going on inside your head, sounds as if it must have been a bit of a sort of pressure cooker situation. How did that pressure finally get released? And if so, what caused it to get released?
Yeah, it was so bad that I'm thinking particularly of my second year. That's when I used to call myself a charlatan because I felt to myself, right, part of the beatings myself up, because I felt like I was being so fake. And there were two things that I used to do because I felt like I had no other outlet. And one would be I was living with my best friend at the time, a guy called Ollie. We had basically what was called a double set at university. So we had a big front room and then we had two really small bedrooms off that front room and a bathroom. So it was, you know, a fairly small space. And but I'd never told him. And so there would be mornings when I was just so in the midst of like anxiety and turmoil that I would sit in my little room feeling like kind of almost caged, waiting for him to leave. And then as soon as I heard his footsteps leave and the door close, I would just lose it. I would start literally throwing stuff around my room. I would punch walls. I would scream as much as I felt able to without, you know, alerting other people around, right? And so like these really like deep growls, just releasing this pain and this. And the other thing I would do is, you know, I've mentioned already that I would wear glasses all the time. But the problem that came from that, so I started with just feeling this, you know, worrying about bags under my eyes. But then the more I wore my glasses, I then developed a second complex, which was feeling that the glasses themselves were making my eyes weak and that my eyes were turning kind of like beady and abnormal and small from that. So I was like, the more I'm wearing the glasses, the more I'm making my eyes more like that. And so I felt this need to not wear my glasses and to wear contact lenses. But of course, I didn't want to ever take my glasses off and have people see me in the contact lenses. So I was in this real kind of catch-22. So in my infinite wisdom, what I decided was that I need to have these days where I would wear my contact lenses. And what I would do is I would put my contact lenses in the morning, but then put my glasses on top, which at this point means I can't see anything. And I would go out and I would, you know, within a few steps, I would bump into somebody. And again, because I've got this persona of being, you know, happy-go-lucky guy to maintain, I immediately put the mask on and start cracking jokes and everything, talking to this person whose face I can't even see. And then I would walk and I would have to sort of, if you imagine the typical kind of librarian who looks down her nose, I'd have to sort of do that in order to walk and not fall over. And hoping that I didn't bump into anybody else. And then I would take myself out to, we had these meadows near university, and I would take myself out into the middle of these meadows, and only then would I take my glasses off and I would just literally scream. And I would do that for, I don't know, a good hour or so. And, you know, again, that was the only outlet I felt I had. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I dealt with it at the time. Now, I'm glad to say that it's much healthier and I talk to people. I feel like I could definitely do it more because, you know, it still feels vulnerable. But yeah, I talk to people and I'm quite open about it. I think a good example, the other day, one of my best friends, we were going to a sort of fancy dress thing. And I wanted to have some eyeliner, which, as you might imagine, is quite quite a challenge for me. I wanted it, but I was like, okay, I'm going to have to deal with like looking closely at my eyes and everything. And so I just asked her, would you help me with this? Especially because I'm not in the habit of doing eyeliner. So I was like, she's a girl, can you help me? But it left me actually feeling really vulnerable afterwards. And we went to this place and she wanted to take lots of pictures, you know, and I did it for a while, but it got to a point where it was just feeling too much. And I just said to her, you know what, Esther, I reckon I've got a few more in me, but then that's going to be my limit because I'm actually feeling quite vulnerable. And that was great because I didn't feel, you know, like I didn't feel ashamed, like there's something that, you know, everybody else would normally be able to do. Hey, we're out, we're fancy dressed, we're going to take some pictures. You know, I wasn't saying, no, I can't do that. But at the same time, I was kind of honoring what I was feeling and going, okay, you know, and just communicating and going, you know what? And that felt really good. So I think, you know, and that means that the pressure cooker feeling doesn't happen so much. I don't sort of just suddenly like lose it or kind of go mad.
Yeah, it's not getting the same opportunity to build up in that way, is
exactly.
it? How did you get then from that real pressure cooker situation to where you are now? What's your sort of recovery story look like?
100% talking to people. I'm the biggest advocate for sharing and being open. Because you realise that you're not alone. And that's so important. And I think when you keep it to yourself, well, either, you know, you don't get the chance for people to go, I know that too. I know that feeling too. Regardless of whether they have BDD or not, right? They can, there's still shared experience. And you don't get another perspective, which is so important with BDD. You really need to check in with somebody other than yourself. And just to say to somebody, go, hey, yeah, I get you. And I know that's tough. You know, and when I say to people that I really recommend it, it's, you know, and I recommend that they do it at their pace. And, you know, be careful at first, or at least, let's say, mindful about who you share with at first. I think that's really important. So, you know, choose somebody that you really trust and whose opinion you value, because not everybody's opinion is worth listening to. And not everybody's going to have, you know, I suppose, frankly, not everybody's going to kind of care enough. But, you know, I think if you have that person that you can really trust, then I think also every relationship where I've shared, I think it's deepened our relationship because it's like kind of, I want you to see all of me. And it's kind of opening myself up to being, and also it's a part of accepting all of me, right, as well. Yeah, so I think that's definitely been part of my process, just realizing that I don't want to, and I realized that I didn't want to keep the people in my life that were important to me at arm's length, which I realized I was doing. Because there was even a stage where I started telling people that I deal with BDD, but wouldn't tell them it was my eyes. And I thought that's enough. That's all they need to know. You just need to know that I have a problem rather than you don't need to know what it is. You just need to know that sometimes I might be moody. And I realized it was partly about just giving me an excuse to be moody and go, it's BDD, leave me alone. And it was another way of just kind of being like, okay, I don't fully trust you because if you knew this, right. And so I was just like, actually, it was kind of like putting the hand back and going, you know what, actually, bring you in. You're important to me and I kind of want you to, and I trust you. So that's made a huge difference to me. And the other thing I always say as well is, you know, Voldemort from Harry Potter, right? Yeah. So they don't call him Voldemort most of the time. They call him, you know, he who shall not be named. And, you know, and I get that. And it's like any good horror movie, you know that you don't show the monster, right? It's Jaws and it's the music and it's the fin. You don't see the actual shark. Likewise, you don't reference Voldemort because the scariest things are the things that we don't talk about, the things that remain unseen, things that remain secret and hidden. And I realized that's what I was like about my BDD. I was treating it like this Voldemort, and therefore it had all this power over me. And what I love about Harry Potter is that at some point, I don't know which book it's in, but you learn that his name is really Tom Marvolo Riddle. You go, that's not scary. Like Tom Marvolo Riddle. That's even a silly name, if anything. Obviously, I'm kind of giving you a pitch of when I'm sort of at my best. Like there's still many moments where I feel very vulnerable talking about the BDD, especially, and I feel very vulnerable, you know, telling people it's my eyes. That still isn't like the easiest thing to say. But I suppose I keep on doing it because I realize it's mine to say and I have control over it. It doesn't have control over me, and that gives me a great sense of freedom.
So that was part one of Omari's story. Thanks again to him for taking the time to share it. To hear about Omari's journey to recovery, listen to episode 9. You'll find it on the BDD Foundation website as well as on major podcast apps and Spotify. Just search for Beating BDD. In the meantime, remember that this podcast isn't therapy, so please do seek help from a trained professional. Thanks for listening.